7 years ago, our lives changed forever when my son Jason was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. The doctor explained that his pancreas had simply stopped producing insulin, the hormone that regulates blood sugar. Without it, his body could not process glucose properly. What followed was a crash course in a new reality: blood glucose monitors, insulin-dosing schedules, carbohydrate counting, and the constant vigilance required to keep my child alive. I remember sitting in the hospital room that first night, watching my 7-year-old son sleeping peacefully, hooked up to IVs and monitors, trying to comprehend how our lives would never be the same. Life with type 1 diabetes requires precision. Every morning begins with a blood sugar check and insulin dose. Every meal requires careful calculation of carbohydrates and corresponding insulin. Every activity impacts blood sugar levels. Exercise can lower it dramatically, stress can raise it unexpectedly, and even growth spurts or minor illnesses can throw everything out of balance. Some nights I would wake at 2 a.m. just to check Jason's levels, terrified of the possibility of nighttime hypoglycemia, dangerously low blood sugar that could lead to seizures or worse while he slept. Despite these challenges, Jason thrived. He maintained excellent grades, developed a passion for competitive swimming, and maintained a positive outlook that constantly amazed me. His resilience in facing a condition that demanded so much from him inspired everyone around him. His endocrinologist often commented that Jason managed his diabetes better than most adults she treated. He never complained about the multiple daily finger pricks, the insulin injections, or the limitations his condition sometimes placed on spontaneity. 3 years ago, we made the decision to move to Oakwood Heights, attracted by the excellent school district, the community pool where Jason could practice swimming year-round, and the proximity to a pediatric endocrinology center specializing in juvenile diabetes. We found a perfect single-story home with a bedroom for Jason near the kitchen, ensuring quick access during potential nighttime emergencies. We developed a meticulous organization system: insulin stored in a specialized refrigerator, backup supplies in clearly labeled containers, and emergency glucagon kits positioned strategically throughout the house. Our interactions with the Homeowners Association were minimal at first: the occasional newsletter in our mailbox, friendly nods from board members at community events. The previous board had operated with a light touch, focusing primarily on maintaining common areas and organizing seasonal community gatherings. This peaceful existence continued for nearly 2 years, until Linda Matthews was elected HOA president, a development that would eventually transform our orderly medical routine into the center of a criminal case that shocked our quiet suburban community. I first noticed the shift when violation notices began appearing on our door with increasing frequency. The basketball hoop visible from the street supposedly violated aesthetic guidelines. Our wind chimes allegedly exceeded noise ordinances. Our garden beds apparently extended 3 inches beyond approved boundaries. Each notice bore the signature of Linda Matthews, a woman I had never personally met, but who had already developed a neighborhood reputation for extreme rule enforcement and intrusive property inspections. The neighbors had started calling it the compliance regime, a term I initially thought was exaggerated until I experienced my first encounter with Linda. It happened on a Saturday morning as I was helping Jason prepare for a swim meet. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find a woman in her early 60s with a short, severe haircut, designer sunglasses perched on her head, and an expression of practiced disapproval. She held a clipboard in one hand and a measuring tape in the other, while her smartphone was poised to take photos. "Linda Matthews, HOA president," she announced without a greeting. "I am conducting a property inspection. Your front flower beds are non-compliant with regulation depth, and I need to document the violation." Before I could respond, she stepped past me onto our porch and began extending her measuring tape toward our garden. "Excuse me," I said, maintaining a polite tone, "would it be possible to schedule these visits in advance? My son has a medical condition, and we try to maintain a consistent routine, especially on competition days." Linda glanced up from her clipboard with a dismissive wave. Section 8.3 of the bylaws gives the board access for inspections at reasonable times. This is a reasonable time. She continued making notes and taking photographs. As she conducted her inspection, her gaze fell on the medical delivery packages stacked neatly beside our door, monthly supplies of insulin, testing strips, and other necessities for Jason's care. "You receive a lot of deliveries," she commented, her tone suggesting accusation rather than observation. "Are you running some kind of business from the home? Commercial activity is prohibited under Section 4.2. "Those are medical supplies," I explained, "for my son's diabetes management." Instead of understanding, I saw something that resembled interest spark in her eyes, not compassion, but the look of someone filing away information for future reference. She made a note on her clipboard before continuing her inspection. In the weeks that followed, we noticed Linda's silver Mercedes frequently driving by our house, sometimes slowing noticeably as she passed. More than once, I spotted her taking photos from her car window. The pattern became concerning enough that I began keeping a log of these drive-bys and installed a doorbell camera for security. What had begun as annoying was evolving into something that felt increasingly targeted and intrusive. Then came the notice of a special HOA meeting about newly proposed medical equipment visibility guidelines. The timing and specificity seemed suspiciously targeted given our recent interaction about Jason's supplies. I decided it was time to attend an HOA meeting and understand exactly what was happening in our community. The meeting room at the community center was uncomfortably warm and crowded when I arrived. Linda sat at the head of the table, gavel in hand, flanked by board members who seemed hesitant to make eye contact with the homeowners. When she reached the agenda item labeled Proposed Amendment 42, Medical Equipment Visibility Guidelines, I understood immediately why the room was so full. Many of our neighbors were older retirees, some with their own medical needs. Linda presented the proposal with clinical detachment. All medical equipment and supplies would need to be kept out of public view, including from windows and during transport into homes. Medical deliveries would be restricted to certain hours, and any equipment requiring outdoor ventilation would need to be concealed behind approved screening structures at the homeowner's expense. When the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand. "I would like to understand the legal basis for these restrictions," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Federal housing law requires reasonable accommodations for residents with disabilities or medical needs. These proposals seem to directly contradict those protections." Linda's smile did not reach her eyes as she responded. "We have consulted with the association's attorney. Communities have broad discretion in maintaining aesthetic standards. Perhaps families with special needs should consider communities better suited to their situations." The room fell silent at the implication. Several neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one else spoke up. Linda scheduled a vote for the following month, effectively dismissing my concerns without addressing them. That evening, I contacted a disability rights attorney who confirmed my suspicions. The proposed restrictions would likely violate both the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. The attorney drafted a formal letter explaining the legal issues and warning of potential liability if the board proceeded with discriminatory policies. I delivered the letter to Linda's home personally, hoping it might prompt reconsideration. Instead, it seemed to trigger an intensification of her focus on our family. Violation notices began arriving almost daily, for garbage cans visible from certain angles, for wind-blown leaves in the yard, for a temporary ramp installed during a week when Jason sprained his ankle at swim practice. I maintained meticulous documentation of what now clearly felt like targeted harassment while trying to shield Jason from the growing stress of the situation. The breaking point came when Jason's school counselor called me. My normally resilient son had seemed unusually anxious that day, eventually confiding that he had seen the clipboard lady taking photographs through his bedroom window the previous afternoon. He had been changing his insulin pump infusion set at the time, a procedure that required partially removing his clothing, and felt violated by the intrusion. I filed a police report that same day, providing our documentation of the escalating harassment and the disturbing new development of potential prowling. Officers visited Linda with a formal warning about trespassing and harassment, explaining that her conduct was approaching the threshold for criminal charges. Rather than de-escalating, this official intervention seemed to enrage Linda. She called an emergency HOA board meeting declaring a crisis of compliance in the community and asserting her authority had been undermined. 2 days later, every home in the neighborhood received notice of emergency inspections for suspected violations, scheduled for the following weekend, coinciding perfectly with Jason's regional swim meet in a neighboring city, an event that had been on the community calendar for months. The morning of the swim meet arrived, and we prepared for our day away from home. I carefully packed Jason's diabetes supplies, insulin pens, glucose tablets, approved snacks with precisely calculated carbohydrate content, backup testing equipment, and extra infusion sets for his pump. We left our home at 6:30 a.m. for the 2-hour drive to the aquatic center, focused entirely on supporting Jason's big day. The meet unfolded beautifully. Jason achieved personal best times in both the 100-meter freestyle and 200-meter butterfly, qualifying for state finals in both events. Watching him emerge from the pool, checking his glucose monitor, adjusting his insulin, and then jumping back into competition with complete confidence filled me with indescribable pride. This was a milestone achievement for any swimmer, but especially meaningful given the additional challenges Jason navigated with his medical condition. We celebrated with his teammates and their families, stopping for a carefully planned dinner on the drive home. Jason calculated his insulin dose for the meal with practiced precision, his spirits high from his accomplishments. We pulled into our driveway just after 7 p.m., tired but happy, the car filled with the comfortable chatter of reliving the day's highlights. The first sign something was wrong was the formal HOA inspection, notice taped prominently to our front door, its official letterhead visible from the driveway. The second was that our front door was unlocked, though I distinctly remembered securing it before we left. I told Jason to wait in the car while I investigated, a sense of dread building as I pushed the door open. The interior of our home showed clear signs of intrusion. Kitchen cabinets stood open, drawers were partially pulled out, and small items had been moved from their usual positions. I moved immediately to the kitchen corner where we kept Jason's insulin refrigerator, my heart sinking when I saw the door standing slightly ajar. Inside, I found the horrifying truth. Jason's insulin vials were empty, the liquid poured out. The backup supply in the refrigerator door had received the same treatment. A handwritten note on HOA letterhead was propped against the empty vials. Medical supplies must be properly stored according to guidelines. Violations have been addressed. I recognized Linda's handwriting immediately from the numerous violation notices she had left on our door. The implication was clear. She had entered our home during our absence and deliberately emptied Jason's life-sustaining medication, apparently believing this would force our compliance with her proposed storage regulations. The severity of our situation hit me like a physical blow. Without insulin, Jason would begin developing diabetic ketoacidosis within hours, a potentially fatal condition where the body, unable to process glucose, begins breaking down fat too rapidly, making the blood dangerously acidic. It was already evening, and most pharmacies would be closed. Even with an emergency prescription, insurance would not cover replacement insulin ahead of schedule without special authorization. I ran back to the car and told Jason we needed to go to the emergency room immediately. He recognized the urgency in my voice and did not question me. I called his endocrinologist from the car, explaining the situation in terse, frantic sentences. She promised to phone ahead to the hospital and authorize emergency prescription replacements. The emergency room staff, recognizing the seriousness of the situation, immediately began treatment while hospital security contacted local police about the deliberate tampering with life-sustaining medication. As I watched my son hooked to IV fluids and monitoring equipment, the celebratory mood of his swimming achievement completely overshadowed by this deliberate act that had placed his life in danger, I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This was not merely harassment or property damage. Someone had knowingly endangered my child's life over homeowners association rules. Mrs. Lewis, The voice came from a tall, serious-looking man in a dark suit who had appeared in the doorway of Jason's hospital room. "I am Detective Ramirez with the County Sheriff's Department. Do you have a moment to speak about what happened at your home today?" I glanced at Jason, who had finally fallen asleep after the emergency room staff had stabilized his condition. A nurse nodded reassuringly. "I will stay with him. You can use the consultation room across the hall." Detective Ramirez listened intently as I described the events leading up to our discovery, taking detailed notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he looked up from his notebook with an expression I had not expected, not skepticism, but controlled anger. "Mrs. Lewis, I want to be clear about how we are approaching this case," he said. "This is not being treated merely as trespassing or vandalism. Tampering with life-sustaining medication with knowledge of its purpose potentially constitutes attempted homicide. We are treating this with the utmost seriousness." His words simultaneously horrified and relieved me. Horrified that the situation had escalated to this level, but relieved that authorities understood the gravity of what had happened. Over the next several days, as Jason recovered in the hospital, the investigation proceeded with remarkable efficiency. I provided the detectives with our documented history of harassment, doorbell camera footage showing Linda approaching our house during our absence, and previous communications that proved she knew about Jason's medical condition and the purpose of his insulin. Police technicians discovered multiple fingerprints throughout our house, focused particularly around the medical supply areas. They collected residue from the sink drain that testing would later confirm was the exact prescription insulin formulation Jason used. The investigation revealed that while HOA bylaws permitted inspection of properties under certain circumstances, no legitimate inspection had been scheduled or approved by the full board for that day. Linda had acted entirely on her own authority, using a master key meant only for community emergencies to enter our home illegally. Most damning was security camera footage from a neighbor's house showing Linda carrying what appeared to be a small cooler away from our property, suggesting she may have removed some medical supplies in addition to destroying others. This neighbor, a retired nurse named Alina, came forward voluntarily when she heard what had happened, expressing horror at the deliberate endangerment of a child with a medical condition. The shock of the investigation rippled through our community. Several board members contacted the police with their own accounts of Linda's increasingly erratic and controlling behavior, including her particular fixation on our family and what one described as an obsession with medical equipment visibility. The HOA vice president provided emails showing Linda had been explicitly advised by their attorney that her proposed medical equipment restrictions would likely violate federal housing laws, but had dismissed these concerns. On the fourth day of the investigation, the district attorney contacted me directly. "Based on the evidence collected," she explained, "we are pursuing multiple serious charges, including first-degree burglary, tampering with medical equipment, and attempted murder." The deliberate emptying of insulin with full knowledge of its life-sustaining purpose for a juvenile with a serious medical condition meets the threshold for demonstrating depraved indifference to human life, which supports the attempted murder charge. Linda Matthews was arrested at her home the following morning. The arraignment hearing was scheduled quickly due to the seriousness of the charges. She appeared in court looking nothing like the intimidating figure who had terrorized our neighborhood, her designer clothes replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit, her imperious demeanor diminished by the circumstances. The judge denied bail based on the prosecutor's argument that Linda posed an ongoing danger to our family and had demonstrated a willingness to use her HOA position to pursue personal vendettas. Her attorney attempted to paint her actions as a misunderstanding, claiming she was conducting a legitimate HOA inspection and cleaned up what she believed was medical waste she deemed improperly stored, supposedly unaware of its critical importance. This defense strategy collapsed during the preliminary hearing when the prosecution presented our documented timeline of harassment, testimony from HOA board members about Linda's unauthorized actions, the forensic evidence from our home, and expert medical testimony about the life-threatening consequences of insulin deprivation for a type 1 diabetic. Most compelling was Jason's own testimony. At 15, he took the stand with remarkable poise, explaining his medical condition and the constant management it required. He described the specialized insulin formulation that had been destroyed, the careful temperature control necessary for its storage, and the potentially fatal consequences of being without it. When Linda's attorney suggested during cross-examination that he could have simply purchased replacement insulin, Jason calmly explained the prescription requirements, specialized handling, and significant cost that insurance would not cover ahead of schedule without emergency intervention. "Without insulin," he testified, his voice steady, "my blood sugar would continue rising uncontrolled. My body would become increasingly acidic as it broke down fat instead of glucose. Within hours, I would experience confusion, labored breathing, and eventually unconsciousness. Without medical intervention, this condition, diabetic ketoacidosis, can be fatal." The courtroom was silent as he spoke. Even Linda, who had maintained an expression of indignant disbelief throughout the proceedings, seemed to grasp for the first time the true consequences of her actions. The judge ruled there was more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all charges, setting bail with strict conditions including no contact with our family and GPS monitoring upon release. As Linda was led from the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of something I had never seen in her expression before: fear. The case quickly attracted media attention beyond our local community. News vans appeared on our street, and my phone filled with interview requests from journalists exploring angles about HOA overreach, disability rights in housing, and the surprising legal vulnerabilities that can affect families managing chronic medical conditions. Advocacy organizations for diabetes awareness and disability housing rights reached out, offering support and resources. I found myself navigating unfamiliar territory, balancing the desire for privacy with the potential benefit of raising awareness about issues affecting families like ours. Jason, initially hesitant about public attention to his medical condition, gradually embraced the opportunity to educate others. "If this happened to us," he reasoned, "it could happen to other kids with medical needs. People should know." As the legal proceedings continued, a remarkable transformation began within our community. Neighbors who had previously remained silent about Linda's harassment began sharing their own experiences of intimidation and overreach. The elderly couple who had been fined for installing a wheelchair ramp, the family who had received violations for their child's physical therapy equipment visible through a window, the widower threatened with liens for having oxygen delivery services visit too frequently. The HOA board underwent a complete restructuring. Members who had enabled Linda's behavior resigned, replaced through special elections with homeowners committed to significant reforms. The new board's first actions included formal apologies to affected families, revocation of problematic rules, and establishment of clear boundaries between legitimate community standards and personal harassment. Most significantly, they implemented new bylaws specifically protecting residents with medical needs and disabilities, ensuring that accommodation rather than compliance became the guiding principle. Unexpected allies emerged from the situation. Eleanor, the retired nurse who had provided the security footage, created an emergency neighborhood support system for families with medical needs. A lawyer 2 doors down offered pro bono consultation on disability accommodations. The local pharmacy implemented a special emergency protocol for critical medications after hearing about Jason's experience, ensuring that residents would never be without life-sustaining prescriptions regardless of insurance timing. We received hundreds of letters from other parents of children with diabetes and chronic conditions, sharing similar experiences with housing discrimination and offering solidarity. Local medical professionals organized an educational forum about supporting community members with chronic conditions, using our case as a catalyst for broader awareness. Jason found new confidence in becoming an advocate, speaking to his school about type 1 diabetes and helping create protocols for other students with medical needs. The community response extended beyond our immediate neighborhood. State legislators contacted us about potential laws to strengthen protections against HOA medical discrimination, using elements of our experience to draft new housing protections that would eventually become known as Jason's Law. 6 months after the insulin incident, Linda's attorney approached the district attorney with a plea offer. Facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a highly publicized trial, Linda agreed to plead guilty to multiple felony counts including burglary, tampering with medical equipment, and reckless endangerment with serious bodily harm, a lesser but still significant charge than the original attempted murder indictment. The prosecutor consulted closely with us about the plea, explaining that it guaranteed substantial consequences while sparing Jason the stress of extensive trial testimony. After careful consideration and discussion with Jason, we agreed to the arrangement. At the sentencing hearing, I delivered a victim impact statement focused not on vengeance, but on education, explaining the devastating psychological impact on a young person whose medical security was deliberately violated, the ongoing hypervigilance our family now experienced regarding Jason's supplies, and our hope that the case would raise awareness about the seriousness of interfering with someone's medical necessities. When you tamper with insulin, I told the court, looking directly at Linda for the first time since the ordeal began, you are not merely damaging property. You are cutting off access to the substance that replaces what my son's pancreas cannot produce. It is as essential to him as oxygen. The decision to empty those vials knowing their purpose was a decision to place his life at risk, a risk that would have become a reality had we not sought immediate medical intervention. The judge issued a sentence that included 5 years in prison, substantial restitution covering all medical expenses and therapy costs, and a permanent restraining order protecting our family. Most significantly, the judge's ruling explicitly addressed the broader implications, establishing important legal precedent about disability protections in housing and the serious criminal nature of tampering with life-sustaining medical supplies. This case should serve as a warning, the judge stated, that homeowners associations, while serving legitimate community interests, do not stand above the law. They cannot enforce rules that discriminate against individuals with disabilities or medical conditions, and they certainly cannot take actions that endanger the health and safety of residents. The defendant's conduct in this case represents an egregious abuse of power that this court cannot and will not tolerate. 1 year after the insulin incident, our family's journey toward healing continues. Jason, now preparing for college with plans to study healthcare advocacy and public policy, has regained his sense of security through therapy and community support. His swimming career has flourished. He qualified for national junior championships and is being recruited by several university programs with strong academic and athletic reputations. My unexpected advocacy role has led to consulting opportunities with disability rights organizations, helping other families navigate housing discrimination and medical accommodation issues. I regularly speak at conferences about patient rights and housing law, sharing our experience to help prevent similar situations for others. Our home, once a place of anxiety and intrusion, has been reclaimed through security improvements, supportive neighbors, and new memories to overshadow the violation. The specialized refrigerator that once stood as a stark reminder of the incident has been replaced with a new model, funded through the restitution payment, and installed during a community gathering that felt like a ceremony of healing and protection. We established an annual scholarship for students with type 1 diabetes pursuing healthcare careers, transforming our traumatic experience into ongoing support for others. The first recipient, a remarkable young woman who manages her own diabetes while mentoring newly diagnosed children, will begin nursing school next fall. The HOA, under entirely new leadership, has become a model for inclusive community governance, with clear policies protecting medical accommodations and a disability advisory committee that reviews all proposed regulations for potential discriminatory impact. Other homeowners associations throughout the state have begun adopting similar reforms, often citing our case as the catalyst for change. Last month, Jason stood at the podium during his high school graduation ceremony, delivering the valedictory address to a packed auditorium. He spoke about resilience in the face of both medical challenges and human cruelty, about the strength found in vulnerability, and about the power of community to heal wounds both physical and emotional. There are moments when life tests us beyond what seems endurable, he said, his voice steady and clear. Moments when the structures that should protect us fail, when the people who should support us become threats instead. But those moments, painful as they are, can become foundations for something stronger. They teach us to distinguish between rules and righteousness, between compliance and compassion. They show us who stands beside us when standing becomes difficult. As he accepted his diploma to a standing ovation, I watched from the audience with a complex mixture of pride, gratitude, and lingering disbelief at the journey that had brought us here. The trauma we experienced will always be part of our story, but it no longer defines us. What defines us instead is what emerged from our darkest moment. The justice that was served, the community that rallied around us, the reforms that will protect others, and the resilience that transformed victimization into purpose. That transformation, I have come to believe, is more powerful than any act of cruelty could ever be. It is the ultimate form of justice, not merely punishment for wrongdoing, but the creation of something better from the wreckage of what was broken. It is the promise that what was meant to harm us can instead become the foundation for healing, not just for ourselves, but for others who might have faced similar harm in silence.